In February 1970, a 16-year-old boy, Zhang Hongbin, denounced his mother to an army officer in his village in Anhui Province, eastern China. He split a note under the office door accusing her of criticizing the Cultural Revolution and its leader Mao Zedong. She was bound, publicly beaten, and executed. Decades later, Miss Zhang began writing a blog about the tragedy, seeking to clear his mother's name and to explain how her death happened. I want to make people in China think, he wrote in April. How could there be such a horrifying tragedy of a son sending his mother to execution? And how can we prevent it from happening again? Miss Zhang suffers recurrent nightmares about his mother. So does China about the Cultural Revolution. What documents at the time called the Great Procurement Cultural Revolution began to advance first sounded 50 years ago, on May 16, 1966, when Mao approved a secret circular declared war on representatives of the bourgeois who had sneaked into the Communist Party, the government, the army, the various spheres of culture. Just over a year later, Mao wrote to his wife Jiang Qing that he wanted to create great disorder under heaven, so to achieve greater order under heaven. He achieved not the first. Between May 1966 and Mao's death in 1976, which in effect ended the Cultural Revolution, over 1 million died. Millions more were banished from urban homes to the countryside, and tens of millions were humiliated or tortured. The Communist Party does not want any public commemoration of those horrors, though it has called the Cultural Revolution a catastrophe. They fear that too much scrutiny might call into question the party's fitness to rule. But debate about it still range on internet in China and even occasionally surfaces in mainstream publications. Its wounds are still raw. On May 2nd, the Great Hall of the People in Tiananmen Square had a gala concert featuring red songs of the period, triggering uproar on social media. Xi Jinping, Chinese president, was himself a victim. Yet his seemingly fondness for Mao, his competence for Western liberal thinking, and his ruthless campaign against political enemies caused some to see parallels between China today and that of the Mao's late year. Like an unexcited demand, the Cultural Revolution still torments China. To most outsiders, the period was one of those episodes of unreason that can afflict a great nation, comparable, say, to French Reign of Terror in 1793. Though that may last only 10 months and claimed few lives, the Cultural Revolution involved 3 years of mob violence and an entire decade of terror. It was a time of ignorance and folly. They beat her to death with their clubs, wrote a student about his teacher. It was immensely satisfying. Schools and universities closed months or years on end. When it reopened, Beijing Middle School number 23 was held up as a model for devoting many hours to Mao Zedong thought and the the training Cultural Revolution and for dictating a very limited amount of time to generate cultural knowledge. It was a time of devastating. The domination of ancient monuments by Islamic State in the Syria city of Panama was an echo of what happened in Qufu, Confucian's birthplace in eastern China. In 1966, groups of Red Guards take over the Confucian temple there, a great national treasure, and smash it up. They destroy thousands of manuscripts, ancient stone tablets, and other federal property of 6,846 official designated places of cultural and historic interest in Beijing. Red Guards vandalized 4,922. Above all, it was time of death in Wuhan, in central China, where 54 rival Red Guard groups fought it out. Middle school students were paid 50 yuan by gang leaders to kill children in rural factions. I killed 5 kids with my star knife, wrote one teenager in Daxing, one of the southern outskirts of Beijing. 325 people from landlord and rich peasant family were killed in one night, with most of the bodies dumped up elsewhere. A Chinese journalist who visited in 2000 was told of an old lady and his granddaughters being burned alive. Granny, I'll get sad in my eyes, the child cried. Soon you'll not feel it anymore, came the reply. In a Namish conference of class hate and resentment to primitive custom, it is claimed that victims in Guangxi province in southern China were eaten according to rank. In the Cultural Revolution of People History, Frank Dorval quote a local account asserting that leaders feasted on the heart and liver mixed with pork, while ordinary villagers were only allowed to poke at the victims' arms and limbs. Medieval estimate that between 1.5 million and 2 million was killed in political violence across China between 1966 and 76, a proportion of the total population that was smaller than the number of Chinese killed in program in Indonesia just before the Cultural Revolution began. It was an all except numbers killed in Eastern episode of violence and calamity inflicted upon China by its communist leader. Millions has died in plagues of landlords and counter-revolutionaries early year after Mao's victory in the Civil War of the 1940s. Tens of millions perished in famines Mao created with his Great Leap Forward of the late 1950s. But what made the Cultural Revolution so unusual was its assault not only upon the lives but also on the values and norms by which people have lived for centuries. One of its core purposes was to accelerate the eradication of the four olds: old custom, old culture, old habits, old ideas. So feminist tie cultural and the Confucian principle of respect for the elder and learning all but targets of Mao's revolution failure. Ba Jing, a novelist, once called the Cultural Revolution China's spiritual holocaust, a strange but perhaps an underspoken one. Among last revolution, Roderick McAfee and Michael Skolholm called the German a saint. This man Hitler was even more furious. The more furious, the better. Don't you think? The more people you kill, the more revolution you are. But the Cultural Revolution was not anarchic for anarchy's sake. It was manipulated by Mao to get rid of him of rival, real and imagined, and to placate the Communist Party of doubters of his wisdom. After famine, Mao thought he was being sidelined. To reassert control, he called on students and workers to bombard the headquarters, that is, attack everyone in authority except himself and those he has clear signal to be his ally. By 1968, almost three-quarters of the members of the Cultural Committee has been doubtfully traitors of counter-revolution. They include Liu Shaoqi, the state president, whom Mao has once tipped as his successor. Has Mao seen his revolution mainly as a means of defeating rival? He might have stopped them, but he won't go further. According to Chen Boda, Mao's secretary in the early 1950s and later Cultural Revolution chief propagandist, Mao thought that when fighting is wrong, one had to go beyond the proper limit. This he repeatedly did. The violence of the Cultural Revolution and many officials claimed as victims. Many explain why China's liberalization of the economy has not gone hand in hand with great democracy. Westerners, the students protesting in Tiananmen Square in 1989, may have seen a million miles from the Red Guards who has assembled there more than 2 decades earlier, screaming Mao's slogan. The China's leaders, there has always been a connection that the Cultural Revolution was kind of big democracy. in which ordinary people was given the power to top officials they hated. The student in 1989 may not have been Mao worshipped, but had they been given a chance, they would have acted like the Red Guards, according to the logic of Chinese official. With chaos vindictive range, they produce no evidence. They do not need to. And the men of cultural revolution continue to disturb the dream of China's democracy.